Hey, it's Dr. Joe Lamb. It's Monday afternoon, and this is the coffee break time here at the PLMC. Michael Stone's not joining us today from Ashland. He's attending a wedding in Boston, or coming back from a wedding in Boston, family celebration. So you've got me alone. Want to make this interactive, and so toss out questions as you have them, and I'll try to just take general Q&A type questions as you're with me, and let's just talk about things and talk about what's going on. So there's a lot going on in the medical world. And a lot going on in our world in general. And, I think that one of the things that has been a topic of concern lately is the Delta variant. And I think it's creating a lot of stress. My takeaway about the Delta variant is it's more contagious. It may be more virulent, which means that, more contagious means easier to spread. More virulent is that it potentially is making people sicker. What we do know is that the great majority of current hospitalized cases are non-vaccinated people. So we're seeing a younger population, and we're seeing more children than we normally have with the other variants. And that's certainly a challenge for us as we go back to school. We've seen some movement in terms of unvaccinated people moving towards getting vaccinated. Some of this is, I think, a natural effect of a lot of us are good observers, and I think that people on both sides of kind of the political divide, and there's all sorts of reasons why people don't get vaccinated: lack of trust in the government, lack of trust in the drug companies and vaccines, beliefs that are politically held about who can tell us what to do what. But I think people on both sides of that issue have noticed the simple facts that people who are unvaccinated are getting this, and they're getting sick, and they're passing it on to a lot of children. So people who previously didn't believe in this may be having a little bit more of an experience where they see it happening to their own kids. And to their own friends. And so they're a little bit more open to getting vaccines. I also think we're seeing more people get vaccinated because of employers are beginning to require it, and states are requiring it, and governments are requiring it. In my state of Washington, healthcare workers, they need to be vaccinated unless they have a medical exemption or a religious exemption by the 18th of October, or they're not going to be able to be employable in clinical settings. Stricter law than they have in California, where you'd be able to do once a week testing. That's not going to be allowed here in Washington State. So we're looking at a future where hopefully more people are going to get vaccinated. The primary reason we need to be better about this is the same reason we needed to be good about wearing masks way back at the beginning, when they told us that we were wearing masks for the protection of others and that we weren't necessarily protecting ourselves. The reason why even us vaccinated people need to wear masks is to protect the kids. And, the children who are too young to be vaccinated, for whom the trials aren't yet completed. And it's a little disappointing to me that it has been so long. But that said, they don't have the protections that we have. They seem to be getting affected more often. And I'd like to see us, rallying around to take care of the kids. I think that would be really quite good. So, important reason to do it. We're not doing it for the people who don't care about themselves. We're doing it for the children, and we're also doing it for immunocompromised adults who, given that the vaccines are not as much of a deterrent against the Delta virus, given that the efficacy can be in the 60s to 80s, depending which vaccine you get and which study you look at. It is important, for the immunocompromised and the people who are challenged who may be vaccinated, people with HIV, people with cancers, people getting certain therapeutic drugs, some of the disease-modifying drugs for autoimmune conditions. Those are the people who are at risk, and they're why we're doing this. We have to do this also for all the people around the world who haven't yet had the opportunity to have access to vaccines. So I'd like this, as I said earlier, to be a Q&A session today since Michael Stone's not able to join us. So if you have questions and you're listening, toss them on out there and I'll try to address them. The other big thing that I see happening is continued stress. I was talking with my colleague Monique Klass, and I was relating my experiences of seeing people come into the office with increased stress. And she was saying she and the physician who she works with, Dr. Joel Evans, and they're in Connecticut, and they have a great practice. It's the Center for Functional Medicine in downstate Connecticut in Stamford. Great place to go if you're on the East Coast. But that said, we're all seeing people with a lot more stress. And I think that stress is going to be jumping out at us. We've just had a big tragedy in Haiti and, a lot of injuries. And on top of that, they're about to get hit by a tropical storm. So they certainly are experiencing physical danger and all the stresses of life. But we kind of take in all of this information. We take in that information. We take in the information about the tragedy that's going on in Afghanistan. And though these things probably aren't affecting most of us directly, and while most of us don't know, the people for whom these events are occurring and don't know people personally, it affects the planetary zeitgeist. It affects kind of the planetary energy. It's almost like that scene in the Star Wars movie number 4, which was the first one released way back, I guess in the summer of '77. And it was released, and there's a scene where Alex Guinness's character, and he played Obi-Wan Kenobi, and Han Solo and Chewbacca and Luke Skywalker, Mark Hamill's character, are introducing Luke Skywalker to the concept of the Force, and they pause for a moment because they feel like a global disturbance. And that was the moment at which an entire planet, the planet of Alderaan, was wiped out. And they could feel the pain, they could feel the suffering, they could feel that experience. And I think in some ways, our interconnectedness, what the dandelion effect, the podcast, and I love the dandelion effect, a knowledge blooming almost like a flower, turning into seeds and being passed from person to person and affecting change. I think that is such a classic title for a podcast that provides such great information from Feathered Pipe. But, the dandelion effect, the concept of, the flapping of a butterfly's wings in the, kind of the quantum interconnectedness, and, that molecules which were once connected, they stay connected even at a distance, that sense of non-locality, so that, what takes place in, a butterfly flapping its wings in China has a consequence of, maybe a storm in the United States. This sort of interconnectedness, the concept behind do a random act of kindness and going out and changing the world in that regard. All of those things makes a huge difference in the world, and we've got to pay attention to them. When we experience stress, we've got to be conscious about it. We've got to have a way of working on it. And then we need to live out that challenge of going out and making a difference in the world, doing something, treating one person better than maybe you would have been capable of if you hadn't consciously made the choice to treat even just that one person better, to do something each day that calls out the opportunity to stand up for something. It's did some filming over the weekend with Dr. Michelle Leary from Vita Health, an integrative practice in kind of the North Sound area, kind of up along the Puget Sound, from Renton right on north, Bellevue, downtown Seattle, an integrative functional medicine practice, a chiropractic practice. They have a great stretch program, Stretch 22, and Dr. Leary leads the functional medicine team. And we did some filming over the weekend, and we had some interesting conversations. You'll get to see some of them coming up. Pieces on kind of intimacy and sexuality and connection and the hormonal roles that are at play for men and women, a discussion of bioidentical hormone replacement for women and risks for coronary artery disease and cardiovascular disease. So we did those two pieces, which will be showing up. But we were talking about kind of this progression. We are a product of our genes. Our genes drive certain of our behaviors. If you read E.O. Wilson's classic book, Sociobiology, which I believe came out in 1975, it postulates that a lot of our behaviors are driven by the fact that our genes want to reproduce. Strategies for what behavior we're going to do, how we're going to act, how we're going to relate to each other, relate to wanting to make copies of our genes. But as Harari points out in the book Sapiens, and which talks about, a cognitive revolution taking place 60 to 70 to 80,000 years ago, something took place in our brains or in our physical bodies, whether it was the ability to communicate, whether it was the ability to use tools. It started changing what we can possibly inherit. And it's not just our genes driving all of our behavior. It's our interaction with the environment, and part of that interaction with the environment is the information and knowledge that we get in. And certainly that piece, getting to about 10,000 years ago when we had the agricultural revolution. And it's kind of fascinating to read some of the books by Michael Pollan. It has a new book, which I've not read, but apparently has a section on caffeine in it. But I did listen to his Audible book, his kind of Audible original short 2-hour piece on caffeine. And he makes a similar argument for the coffee plant as for wheat. Wheat, a mutant form of the plant, which we grow, which wouldn't be able to self-reproduce because it doesn't drop its seed. Instead, it keeps it on the plant. That plant needed us, and that plant actually now controls us, and it's led to it becoming one of the dominant plants in the world. Similarly, caffeine, which may have something to do with the start of the Enlightenment and the leading into the direction of the Industrial Revolution, moving from a kind of daily zeitgeist of everybody enjoying their wine or their beer or their other fermented beverage or distilled beverage to suddenly now enjoying coffee, being mellow on the one hand from alcohol, maybe being drunk, but certainly not having the sharpest thinking, to suddenly being caffeine laden and driven and having a whole different approach. It really does make an incredible difference. And here we are kind of, both of those plants now have us doing their work, which is an interesting way of looking at the Industrial Revolution. The agricultural revolution, and then the kind of domestication of both wheat and coffee. But one of the things that becomes clear is we had to learn enough and communicate enough and share enough knowledge to get to the point of having the agricultural revolution and the Enlightenment and the Industrial Revolution, and get to where we are now. And, we actually are living in a world of too much energy at this point in time, and we're living in a world of too much information. Anyone who spends any time looking at the internet or looking at Instagram or looking at Twitter or Facebook or any of the sources of information knows that you can be overwhelmed. Social media is changing our relationships. It's changing what we expect from our relationships. It's changing the way how we communicate with others. In and of itself, information is never bad. In and of itself, technology is never bad. But what we're doing is we're abdicating our responsibility to use it wisely. Harari wrote a follow-up book called Homo Deus. Human beings belong to a species called Homo sapiens, which means knowing man. And Homo Deus is talking about, are we becoming a new species, God-man? And he chooses to endow us with that title of God-man because of the opportunity that's coming for us to design who we are as a species. We have gotten to the point that we could have relative immortality. People could live hundreds of years with the technologies that we have available. Not that we can afford to provide that level of care for everybody, but the wealthy are at a point that with immense wealth, you can get almost indefinite lifespans. Certainly 200-300-year lifespans are not outside the realm of possibility for technology at this point in time, depending how you apply it and depending how much money you have to use. The next big piece facing us as we design the future is the whole concept that we can actually change who we are because we can control genetic influences. And then one of the final parts of this is, how do we use all that information? Do we make ourselves like the $6 million man? Do we make ourselves connect directly to a machine? The bionic woman, the $6 million man, we can make them better than they were before. Well, there's something to be gained, but there's something to be lost. And people are exploring these areas, and we're not thinking about it. As we create artificial intelligences, even if they're external to us, they're going to make a difference in the way we live our lives. David Brin wrote a very kind of foretelling story called Earth back in the early 1990s. It's kind of a mystery about a black hole, and that black hole and how it affects the human world in like 2030 through 2050. But the interesting piece about the book is that he did a really nice job of postulating how what he called at the time, well, I actually forget the word that he used, but he was aware of the early stages of the internet at the time that it was still mostly an academic and government tool for sharing information and sharing academic literature resources. Kind of you do a literature search to know about medicine, or you do a search to know about energy or chemistry, sharing that scientific data around. At that point in time, he postulated what the future is going to look like. And interestingly, one of the things that he missed was he didn't realize how much misinformation was going to be there. And it becomes important for us to say, as we look at a future that we're going to change our world, we've got to play a role. Recently, I've been participating in a series of online discussions with some colleagues about topics of foreign policy, and I'm suddenly blanking on the name of the organization, but they actually make videos and a book available to the general public to facilitate communication in the home. And one of the first topics was our trade war with China. And it was asking the question as, are the Chinese trying to beat us financially? But, one of the things that plays a role there is a lot of the changes that have taken place because American companies have taken the jobs offshore. The Chinese haven't grabbed them. They've made it economically advantageous, but they haven't grabbed them. And I think that becomes really important. We need to think about how we talk and think. The Chinese are not necessarily the culprit in that regard. American companies are responsible for some of that change. And when we think about it that way, different solutions present themselves. Dr. Mercola, who some of you may follow, was recently pointed out as being the leader of the disinformation dozen. I should be clear about that. He doesn't lead the group, but he's the number one person on that list of disinformation about vaccines. And he had a posting on social media not that long ago where he said that he was being censored. Yes. Social media took down his direct misinformation. He implied that he was being forced to take it off his own website as well, but no one censored him. He has the right to say what he wants to say, and we all have the right to disagree, and we have the right to stop someone shouting fire in a crowded public place. And we have to remember that there are a lot of people out there on all sides of the questions that are facing us shouting fire. If we had a revolution 60 to 70,000 years ago where we started viewing the world differently, cognitively. We need to have a revolution now where we start viewing the world a little bit differently, start being critical about the information we're presented, look for the resources, look for the background, be clear about what we want, and be clear about what the objectives are of the people who say things to us. A lot of times, what they're saying to us is deliberately to further their own goals and not necessarily to take care of each other. And that's where we need to be. You know, I've been a little bit on a soapbox during this episode this afternoon. We've kind of gone around in circles. Sorry that there weren't a lot of questions from the audience. I appreciate the shares that there have been. And what I would just say once again is to challenge people to go out and to do a random act of kindness. Do something for someone that you wouldn't have done unless you were consciously thinking about it. Take that extra step. We can make this a better world. We can reduce our stress. We can cultivate our gratitude, and we can create a different energy in our global zeitgeist. I hope you guys have an awesome Monday afternoon. Sorry that several people seem to have joined just here at the end, but thank you. And I hope if what you heard was interesting, you'll go back and watch it a little later. And we'll also probably be posting this on YouTube. Michael Stone will be back with me next Monday afternoon at 4 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time. And actually, this may be the third Thursday of the month. It is the third Thursday of the month. So we're going to be doing a lunch and learn. And the lunch and learn this time is going to be on the topic of what is functional medicine and why you need it. So we're starting a whole new program. Thanks a lot. Take care and have an awesome remainder to your week. Bye-bye.